Good morning and welcome to another edition of Sharp Takes, Season 2. This morning I'm delighted to have as my guest Representative Peter Conlon, who shares many positions. He's on the Commission for the Future of Public Education. He's chair of the House Education Committee, and he represents Cornwall and associated maybe 7 communities in Addison County in the legislature. And before we get started, I'd like to put a plug in for the work that Middlebury Community TV out of Middlebury and Neat TV out of Bristol do to make this show possible. They do a lot of work behind the scenes, and I appreciate their work. We want to hear from our listeners and viewers. What's your thoughts? Who do you want to see on interview, and what topics are important to hear some public information about? We've focused so far on public education, but there are other big issues out there, specifically healthcare and housing are 2 big issues that the legislature have been dealing with. So without further ado, welcome, Peter. It's wonderful to have you here and share what's happening in the world of public education.
Great. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning. Yeah.
So if you'd like, I can start with
Yeah.
basically an update and give a sense of where things stand with Act 73 of 2025, which people perhaps knew as H454. But this is the education transformation bill that the legislature passed right at the end of our session, and then the governor signed a little bit thereafter. Act 73 is really a framework, kind of a roadmap toward really changing the way we fund, and I won't say deliver education, but set up the governance of education. It's kind of like we did through Act 46, but probably some bigger steps and a little, I would say, less complicated because it's a little more top down. But to be very clear, all Act 73 did that is in place right now is a couple of things. One of which is set up this school district redistricting task force, whose job it is to look at the map of the state, look at school districts, look at where schools are, towns are, mountains are, and propose to the legislature, recommend 3 different maps for us to consider. Not necessarily, we're not bound to pick from any of them, but for us to consider. And there's a really strong team of people working on this, former educators, former business managers, school board members, and legislators. And then the other thing that Act 73 did sort of formally is to put some new restrictions on independent schools, which ones can qualify for public dollars. Otherwise, what it really is mostly talks a lot about what the legislature intends to do in the future, assuming many other issues are worked out in the meantime.
So can I stop you for just a second and say my understanding is that if new district bounding, if a new map is not established by the legislature after these recommendations are made by the Act 73 committee, then the legislature will consider a new map. And if that new map does not go into place, very little of 454 moves forward. Is that correct?
It is. There are things that already have moved forward, but really the foundation formula funding and many other things are contingent on larger districts that can sort of build that economy of scale that is sort of built into the whole larger formula. Now, there's a lot of work going on in other areas called for within 73 that whether or not we adopt these new districts or not is important. A study on how we implement and fund special education, building upon the work done when you were in there with Act 173. There is significant investigation into another topic that you're near dear to your heart. How do we fund and govern our CTE centers across the state in order to make that a robust system where all students in Vermont have kind of equal access to programming? across the state. So there's important work going on that is important whether or not we move to these large districts. But then there are some really significant questions that need to be answered before we can move forward with the bigger districts, including how are we going to govern and fund career and technical education? How are we going to fund special education? But then we've got, there's some really significant things like what do we do about debt? Supposing you're included in a district with Burlington, Winooski, and Colchester, which between the three of them, they have over $300 million in debt.
Yeah.
Do you take that on as Milton? That needs to be answered.
Yeah.
And because we have to figure out how they can be done in an equitable way across the state. And then there are a number of other questions, as well as sort of updating our funding formula. And then the Agency of Education in Vermont, we've asked them to do a number of things that need to be accomplished before moving forward. For example, something as simple as coming up with a statewide school calendar that is the same across the state, something that has been tried numerous times over the past 30, 40 years and failed.
Yeah. Does the State Department of Education have the capacity to do the work they've been asked to do?
They would say yes. They just went through a big reorganization, created some new positions. We've certainly provided them with the funding that they need in order to have the staff resources to make this happen. But I think we're getting better clarity on that later in the year. There were definitely some key positions that needed to be hired in order to provide school systems the help they need in order to make this transition. Not sure whether those positions have been filled or whether they're ready for that.
And with 454 and the challenges moving forward, where's the State Board of Education in all of this?
So the State Board of Education continues to have the responsibilities it's always had. And they are also going through a big look at, okay, what are our current roles and responsibilities? What are the current roles and responsibilities of the Agency of Education? And which ones should be shifted from one to the other? So, the State Board of Education it has existed all along, even through the transition from when we had a Commissioner of Education to a Secretary of Education. But their roles haven't had a good, serious review in a while, largely because they haven't had the resources to do that. They do now, and I think that there's a lot of stuff that they do, sort of small regulatory stuff that's in their purview that could be better done by the agency. But meanwhile, the State Board is a really valuable group in that it's very public-facing. All their meetings are out in the open. And that's really a great place for all of the rulemaking to take place. We pass a law, that law then needs to be sort of translated into lots of rules and regulations, but that needs to be done in a public way, and the State Board's really well equipped for that.
Interesting. The transition is broad and deep, it seems like.
Yes.
Part of that, to turn our attention for a little while on the work that you do, you're on the Commission for the Future of Public Education. I think that's the proper title.
Yeah.
How's that work been changed by the legislature, and how is it moving forward?
So when it was first created in 2024, the Commission on the Future of Public Education was really given a broad task to essentially come up with a blueprint for the future of education in Vermont. It was given 18 months to do this. Soon thereafter, it became clear that the governor was going to introduce his own plan, which is what was introduced in 2025. And that really sort of took the agenda away. Some would say hijacked it. Some would say moved things forward at a faster clip. But agree or disagree, it was the reality. And so really the governor's blueprint and proposal for transforming education in Vermont really became the vision. And that was what the legislature worked on, modified, still really follows much of the same concepts that the governor came up with. But that sort of left the Commission on the Future of Public Education searching for a mission.
Right.
And what we ultimately decided, and I'm on the commission, and this was in consultation with the then chair and vice chair, was to say, okay, if the legislature is going to take on all these big concepts, let's think about where this group of people could best serve. And so their role was really slimmed and focused on 4 areas. That is to make recommendations to the legislature on what should be the role of the state and what should be the role of the local entities, school boards, school districts, that sort of thing. Should the roles
So just to interrupt for a second, that's top down. How top down are we going to become?
that's right.
Basically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which roles should remain
Yeah.
and which roles should be, take a question like, in this new world, somebody's got to decide where every student in Vermont actually goes, what school building they go to for school. Should that be a state level decision, or should that be a local decision, or should the state put parameters around how a local group makes that decision? Just as one example. Then we also taken a deep dive into the roles and responsibilities of school boards versus the electorate. So, for example, in this new world, the electorate, you must have the electorate vote on whether you want to purchase, sell, or lease property. So, that's one area. Where should negotiations on salary and healthcare take place? At the local level or at the state level? So that's another area. So that's 2. Third was to look at the school closure process. First of all, what does school closure mean? Are you, still operating a building as an entity that's educational, but isn't necessarily doing a K through 6?
Yeah.
And then, how can we create a process that in a larger district still provides strong community voice in that decision?
Yeah.
And the fourth, which I'm going to try to come up with, is how can we or should we create sort of another entity to monitor the implementation of all of this in a way that is very public facing? Probably not a lot of enthusiasm to create yet another outside organization, but perhaps that work can be delegated if it's not believed that the legislature is enough to create that public facing monitoring, because the legislature is only in session 4.5 months. Should that be turned over to the State Board of Education, which meets throughout the year in public meetings?
Yeah.
So those are the areas, and then we have sort of the broad, anything else we want to come up with. But those are the areas that we're focused on. We are currently putting together a preliminary report. It's going to go out, receive some public comment. We'll incorporate that public comment into a final report, which is really recommendations in those areas for the legislature to consider.
Now, none of these 4 things seem like very easy paths to take. There's all kinds of hurdles in the way. Can you talk a little bit about some of those hurdles?
Well, the recommendations that that this commission makes, a lot of it is, as we have we're talking about this at a meeting yesterday, it will be to sort of leave the current roles and responsibilities and powers in place as they exist. So those are easy recommendations to make. But there are more challenging questions. If you go to these much larger districts, that requires bringing every contracted employee on a salary schedule that they can all agree on. And as we went through Act 46, we saw that meant essentially leveling up salaries and benefits.
Yeah.
So everybody was at the same level. So should that be done at the state level? Should we have a statewide teacher's contract, for example? We currently have statewide negotiations for healthcare.
So the statewide negotiations over healthcare have not been cost saving, nor have they been smooth or, from many people's perspectives, successful transformation to move from local negotiating over healthcare to state negotiating. I, for one, suspect the same hurdles if we're going to just talk about contracts in general. Are we going to level up every teacher in the state to Burlington's contracts or South Burlington's contracts? There's not any savings there. and a lot of people have been talking about savings. That seems to me like a huge increase in costs.
As we talk about the hurdles of implementing Act 73, that's one of the big ones. You know, the calculations to bring everybody, no one could really say this is the level everybody should be brought up to. South Burlington being the highest paid teachers in the state, I don't think that folks in the Northeast Kingdom are going to say, oh, sure, we'll increase everybody's salaries by 20%. But the vision that the governor had with this, and a vision we'd like to maintain, is that you would create higher salaries for teachers, but you may have fewer of them.
Yeah. So it seems to me also incorrect is maybe the word I'll use to have Northeast Kingdom teachers being paid at the same level as South Burlington teachers. If you buy a house in South Burlington, you're talking $500,000. If you buy a house in Newport, it's probably half that.
Yeah.
So, and other aspects of rural Northeast Kingdom life versus urban South Burlington life, the dollar cost factors are wildly different. And to say that okay, so therefore all salaries should be the same, seems difficult or unfair actually to some sectors of the economy.
Yep. This is going to be one of the hard things that's going to have to be figured out. You know, ultimately, you could say negotiations for both healthcare and salary and other benefits will be left to the local district, which can account for those geographic differences. But if we are talking about significantly larger districts, you could have a mix of areas where it's a very high cost of living together with an area that is a lower cost of living. And how do you equalize that? Just, maybe somebody comes up with a great formula that accounts for that, or you level up people within that district to the same salary schedule, which is certainly much easier to manage.
Yeah. For example, the governor's proposal was for our area would be from Rutland County, the top of Rutland County, to the Canadian border,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
And within that geographic area, there are widely different rural nature cost factors, housing cost factors, salaries are wildly different from one end to the other.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fair to say no one considered, perhaps maybe even the governor, I think maybe that was more a discussion point than anything else, the size of the districts that were proposed, especially the Franklin, Chittenden, Addison County grouping of 36,000 students.
Let's not forget Grand Isle. They
And
were in there
yes,
too.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's crazy. Did anybody, you alluded to the fact that maybe the governor didn't even support the proposal he put forward.
Well, I think that there were, there were definitely people who supported the full package that the governor put forward. So, that when you have that scale, they calculated that you could reduce the cost of education. But I think in general, I don't think Vermonters are ready for that scale, nor would it would really disenfranchise voters, and just because of the geographic distances involved. And so I think it's fair to say that the district, the redistricting committee, is looking at significantly smaller districts.
Yeah, so one of them that was proposed, the Campaign for Vermont, put on paper a proposal and sent it to the Act 73 committee. And that essentially proposed that Addison County be a single district. And so that would include your district and your constituents. How do you read that proposal out of the Campaign for Vermont?
Oh, well, I think that the idea that, and let's just talk about sort of the three main school districts that are within Addison County. We've got sort of Hancock and Granville and Orwell that are sort of parts of other counties' school districts. But if we talk about Addison Northwest and Mount Abe and Addison Central, those superintendents themselves have talked about becoming one district. And I mean, that's probably a model district that should be looked at.
Has anybody talked with Hannaford superintendent about being part of the district?
Well, how we govern and manage career and technical education centers is one of the big questions that needs to be answered. You know, the Hannaford Career Center, even though it serves exclusively those schools,
Right.
it is governed independent of them.
Yeah.
It used to be governed under Middlebury Union High School, but then many years ago became independent.
It's not only governed separately, it's taxed separately.
That's right.
And funds are spent
Yeah.
independently of the other districts.
So I think a future will probably look like either career and technical education centers will be part of that larger district, just part of it, basically a program of that district, or they will all across the state fall under a separate single governance structure. I think those are really the two concepts being looked at most seriously.
Yeah.
But if you want to look at Addison County, over the years, we have seen significant population loss or declining enrollment.
Yeah.
And, I think one could argue quietly, but I'll say it publicly, we probably have two too many central offices and one too many high schools, given the number of students that we have across the county.
Yeah. Geez, I might narrow that even further and say we have, I think of the schools that serve secondary students, which is really 4 schools.
Adding in middle schools.
And that's how my brain works. And so I think we have 3 too many secondary schools would be my perspective. And so it's interesting. I think in terms of like what problems are we trying to solve? And from my perspective, the 2 problems that we really ought to be addressing is that the barrier between traditional academic schools and career and technical schools. There's a barrier there that hurts us economically. We don't have the tradespeople available to plumb our kitchens or wire our homes or businesses. And certainly in the healthcare professions, nurses and care providers in healthcare, and other trades that we ought to be made available to our secondary level students. So that's one problem I think we should solve. The other is that we're becoming less and less able to offer the kinds of educational opportunities and programs in the academic high schools that we want to be providing for our students. And I don't see how one district for Addison County necessarily solves those problems.
Well, it really comes down to school buildings and efficiencies. One of the real challenges we have with our Career and Technical Education Center is that, under current law, it draws from Middlebury Union High School, Mount Abe, and Virgins. Those 3 schools have all seen significant declining enrollment. So therefore, it is really hard to draw enough kids to have a robust program at the Career and Technical Education Center. Now, state law allows for them to draw students from other areas if their local CTE is full or doesn't offer a program.
Right.
And that is the case. And so we definitely could draw more from Otter Valley, for example. But, declining enrollment is having a significant impact, and it is the same with the academic programs that we offer. If we are going to continue to operate 3 high school buildings, those all have to be staffed to a certain level. And the cost of doing that means that you can't offer everything to everybody because it's hard to justify an AP calculus class if there are only 3 or 4 kids in it.
Yeah.
But when you have more kids under one roof, you can build the scale you need to say, okay, we've got enough kids to justify kids and money following the kid to justify these programs. Now, you would say we have 3 too many out of 4 schools. Your solution would require also building something because we have limitations on what our schools could. In other words, you can't put everybody from Virgins and Mount Abe into Middlebury Union High School. I don't think, but you know, building a larger regional facility is a fabulous concept, but the money isn't there.
Yeah. Well, if we had high school, my high school when I was going through school was high school was 10, 11, and 12.
Yeah.
Middle school or junior high, we used to call it, was 7, 8, 9. So if we moved all the high school students, 10 through 12, I bet we could fit all of them in Middlebury between the existing traditional high school and the tech center. I bet we could do that. And I challenge you when you said earlier, talking about 3 high schools. We have 4 high schools in Addison County. Hannaford Center functions as a high school. It has high school students.
Yes.
So we really need to, I think, we really need to talk about 4 high schools in Addison County and how we move forward. And I suppose, yes, I think my grand vision would be that we would have, would build a school out maybe near the state police barracks, somewhere in the central area of Addison County, a new campus, and the certainly the real estate where Middlebury, both the tech center and the high school there, and in Virgins, that real estate is prime city center real estate that could be made into housing that we need so badly, right? The same is somewhat true in Bristol, although it is not quite center city. It's a suburb, if you will, off to the south of the village itself. So do you think
what I would,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think the concept is great. The more that we can sort of have comprehensive high schools where going to a CTE class is just like going to French,
Yeah.
the better.
Yeah, thank you. Because that would, I think that would solve the 2 problems that I see need solving. What we have this map that the Campaign for Vermont has put forward. It still has this sort of urban school district that has 2 tech centers, high teacher salaries, and a lot of students. Is that functionally a viable plan?
I can't answer that. I don't know anything about a Campaign for Vermont map. I'm following the work of the redistricting task force because they're the ones who are going to provide the recommendations to the
Yeah.
legislature. So I don't know.
What can you tell us about that group?
So that it's an excellent group of people with broad experience. They are working diligently, but it's a really tough assignment that we've given them. But they are working with vast resources of information from our state information service. So they're looking at maps that show where mountain ranges are, where every school is. They're doing it in a very scientific, data-driven way. Ultimately, it's going to come down to a lot of politics. That probably will happen more in the legislature. But they're doing their best to come up with what they feel answers their mission and is best for students in Vermont. So while the legislature said we'd like to see districts of 4,000 to 8,000 students to the extent practical, I think that they are probably using the expression "to the extent practical," taking that very seriously and saying, something, a 4,000 student district doesn't work in the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, I think as small as Vermont is, you'd think, oh yeah, we can do one thing for all of Vermont. I think that within our borders, there are huge cultural, geographic differences from area to area within the state, which makes the work of these 2 committees and makes the work of the legislature really difficult.
Yeah.
voting is not going to break down along party lines, I suspect, when it comes to the biggest hurdle of all, which is getting something passed in the legislature.
So education issues are never on political party for the most part, because it really depends on where you're from, sort of what sort of school system you're accustomed to in your area. Some parts of the state have choice where the students at the high school age have their parents can send them to whatever school they want. That if it's even if the in a private school that is what we call an approved independent school, and we have other parts of the state where we have very small high schools that people cherish, and we have other parts of the state that are as large as the largest district we could want at full capacity, and they love that. So how do we bring people together on that? It's certainly not along party lines. Act 73 itself passed on a bipartisan basis, and not in sort of the, well, let's all come together and have a big hug, but more like we got just enough Democrats and just enough Republicans to vote for it
Yeah,
to pass it.
yeah, yeah. So, yeah, I think your work is challenging going forward. And I want to thank you so much for doing that work, serving Vermont in that way, because I think we do need some sort of transformation in our education system. And the real challenge is how we thread that needle, or how we move forward in a way that people can live with. How do we? I think one of the mistakes with Act 46 was we did not have enough uh, pieces of encouragement there for high schools to merge or close or realign in ways that was useful. Um, and I think that'll be a challenge in terms of whatever product you come forward with. And on the other hand, how we protect community schools that voters feel are so important to protect. Um, so I think that is a big challenge that you're facing, and I want to thank you for that.
Well, I would just add one more important thing, and that is affordability. I mean, this drive really came from the 2024 school budget votes, where I think a majority of budgets across the state were voted down repeatedly, and Vermonters said, you know, we can't take these big increases in our property taxes anymore. Um, that can't get solved quickly, but it requires a deep dive into how we're doing things right now.
Yeah, we haven't touched on money. Money's a big issue, of course, and I think the perfect storm of you know implementing the new weightings for poverty, plus the COVID money going away, plus challenges, mental health challenges of students, and
Healthcare
so
costs going up dramatically.
healthcare costs going up. I think these all sort of came together as a perfect storm that
Absolutely.
created these significant increases in property taxes.
Yeah.
And
And I would say, from a political point of view, significant increases in Republican representation in the House and Senate.
yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's a reaction to that, which is partly the basis of this show. Was the Middlebury Community Television Board wanted the public to better understand what's happening with public television, with public education, and my hope is that these series of shows that I've been doing, you've been on twice as a guest, which I really appreciate. My hope is that the public it does understand better what's going on with education.
Yeah, it's hard. It's very complicated, but it is really important programs like this to get the word out.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Once again, please let us know what's on your mind. Who would you like to hear in a conversation about public education or other important statewide topics? Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Want to be a guest on Sharp Takes? Have an opinion you want Dave to hear about? Email Dave Sharpe at gmavt.net.